What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about what Canadians love about Canada. And as Americans, I think we have our own ideas of what we think is great about Canada or what Canada does better than the United States. Usually, we immediately point to healthcare or education. So today, I want to look at this Reddit discussion where Canadians answered the question, what is your favorite thing about living in Canada? I want to learn and hear from Canadians. What do Canadians love about Canada? Very interested. So let's take a look at some of the top answers here, starting with the great outdoors. That's the great outdoors, not what I was thinking of, not what I was expecting as an American, but that is such a good one. And I feel like it's so true that Americans, for some reason, when we think of Canada, we don't think of the amazing geography and geographical features and the outdoors in Canada. Americans, we're just like stuck in a stereotype of well, for one thing, when we think of a lot of Canada and provinces, we don't even know what is out there. We don't know what to think or imagine. But Americans do not realize how many different like climates and geographical features you can like find all these different things in Canada, like forests and plains and like islands and beaches and all like depending on where you go in Canada, you can find so many different like climates and geographical places to live. Like it's actually quite incredible. Whereas as Americans, we think Canada is just a frozen tundra, like all of it. Canada does have some frozen tundra, like to the north, I'm pretty darn sure. But most Americans don't even realize that Canada is actually an amazing place. Like you could travel there, and actually Americans could travel and vacation in Canada. Maybe that's not what a lot of Canadians want me to tell all the Americans here. It's like, stop, shut up, don't tell the Americans to come here. Like, but yeah, I don't know. It'd be a good thing. It'd be for like travel and tourism, making a little money off the American tourists, but having to deal with our sort of annoying, annoying way we are. So it's a trade-off. The great outdoors, that's such a good answer. And that might seem so obvious to a lot of Canadians, but let me tell you, it's not obvious to Americans. Not at all. What else do we have here? Things that Canadians love about Canada and living in Canada. I have nothing to compare it to, having only lived in Canada. But I feel like I won the lottery being born in a place like this and having the life I do. That's very nice. That's really, like, awful wholesome to actually read. Now, to be perfectly honest, as much criticisms as the United States gets, the United States is also an amazing place to live. Like, as an American, I feel like if you were born in America or Canada or any kind of first world country, you're winning at life. You're in a pretty darn good situation. There's people who are struggling all over the world, even in America and probably in Canada. But yeah, I agree with this sentiment. I feel like I won the lottery being born in Canada. I feel like we all kind of feel that way if we're watching some American on YouTube ramble about the greatest things about Canada. If you're experiencing that, you're probably having a pretty good time in compared to the horrors of the world and all that. But I totally get this. I've often wondered, especially from all the Canadian content I've gotten to consume and sort of the Canadian culture I've seen on the internet, it's really opened my eyes to like really beginning to understand Canadians have a totally different outlook on like life and a totally different outlook on the United States. Like getting to see the United States from like an outsider's point of view is very different to my experience living here. And I actually think that's one of the things I really value the most reading discussions like this is kind of hearing the Canadian frame of mind, the Canadian thought process and outlook. Because even though we're talking about why Canadians love Canada here in these comments, but also I can kind of relate it back to, oh, why don't we think this way about America and how to, there's certain relationships that are very eye opening, honestly. Anyway, at the risk of getting too philosophical here, let's move on. Nature. Another Canadian that's saying, hey, I love nature about Canada, especially where I live in Northwest Ontario. Northwest Ontario. Northwest Ontario. What is in Northwest Ontario? I have done at least one or more videos on some really, really cool things in Ontario. Not just Toronto, but there's actually a lot more to Ontario, I know. Imagine that. But Northwest Ontario, I don't know if I know a whole lot about that. But his point being nature, that's kind of my big point here for Americans. Totally not knowing about nature. Like I'm right now, I'm like, I don't know about nature in Northwest Ontario. That sounds amazing. And I have seen videos before on other parts of Canada, and that's where I have this overwhelming sense of, oh my God, there's a lot to Canada in terms of nature, in geography, in places that I never imagined. Truly, growing up as my little American self, never imagined all that existed in Canada, and I've only seen a glimpse of it, a glimpse. So it makes sense to me that Canadians in this discussion are like, yeah, the nature here is awesome. And I'm finally starting to be like, yeah, that's true. I'm getting a sense of that. What else do we have? What Canadians love about Canada. Summer. Summer exists in Canada? No, what? That's not a thing. What are you talking about? Nothing is as lovely to me as summer in southern or central Ontario. Lovely forests, so many lakes, streams for swimming. Really, summer in Ontario. Another Ontario reference as well. Yeah, that's it's a whole nother thing Americans don't think of, that's for sure. Is that I hate to keep saying this, but so many Americans really think Canada is winter and cold and barren and igloos all year round. I don't. It's such a childish sort of thought process to have, but I think you'd be surprised how many American adults actually think that as well. Truly. So yes, another one about the summer, the climate, the nature in Canada. That's a really big one. That's coming up quite a bit in this discussion, actually. I feel like depending on where you live in Canada, you can kind of choose a little bit what kind of climate and temperature you want to live in. You can live all the way, because I know it's a lot different on the west coast of Canada, or you can be all the way on the east with the maritime provinces, and or you can be north and be a little bit colder, or closer to the border here, where it's probably a bit warmer. I think that's where most Canadians definitely live. I think like within an hour of the U.S.-Canada border. I think like 90% of Canadians or something live there. Anyway, let's keep going. What do Canadians love about Canada? Freedom! Freedom! We are very free here. I have enjoyed that all my life. This is freedom. I feel like America tries to have a patent on freedom, like we own freedom. And for the longest time, Americans would have said the exact same thing. Like well, they'll still say that to this day, but my point is that freedom and American patriotism and America, freedom, used to be like running through our veins for the longest time in American history. And I think for the first time in the last 10 or maybe 20 or 10 years, the American American patriotism has kind of gone down. It's kind of been reduced. The amount that Americans are over the top, like America is the best, the most free, the most amazing. And I think that has probably a lot to do with the internet. Like Americans finally getting a little exposed to like world news a little bit, seeing a little bit of what's out there and being like, okay, you can actually do stuff differently like in Canada, for instance, do healthcare and education or government a little differently. So our idea of America and freedom and what freedom means, what freedoms you want and you cherish, all that is kind of changing, I think, a little bit. For the first time, people are thinking about that a little bit more seriously, for sure. But yes, that was the over philosophical answer. The simple answer is Canada is obviously an amazing place to live. That is definitely, like, compared to all the countries on the planet, one of the most amazing free places you could live. I'm sure Canadians, like Americans, have our, like, complaints about certain freedoms and rights, and that's good. It's good to complain about that stuff, and it's good to question that stuff. It's kind of our responsibility. But on the whole, compared to like somewhere in the world that's like under a dictatorship or where you don't even elect your rulers, we have it pretty good. We have it pretty good. So yeah, I totally agree with that. Okay, what else do Canadians love about Canada? Walking around, not being afraid of guns or police. Here we go. Here, I was waiting for this one. This is like a direct shot at the United States, I think, for good reason. So in Canada, Canadians love that they don't have to walk around being afraid of guns. Funny enough, as true as it is, I mean, it's undoubtedly true that here in America, we have much more lenient gun laws and rights to own guns. There's more guns. There's more people with guns in the United States. There's no denying that. For some reason, I've said this before, but living in America, and I know it depends on where you live, in a lot of parts of America where it's not like some major city or super high crime, you don't really think about guns all that often. I know that's a little strange. And I don't live in like Texas or anything where maybe guns would be a little more tip of mind, where like guns are part of the culture in some of the southern states. Like that's definitely true. But I think on average, this is an overgeneralization. Even though guns are so accessible, disturbingly accessible when I think about it, they're disturbingly available, and they're easy to get. That's a disturbing thought, but I'm not as disturbed as you might think, and I'm trying to be introspective and understand, am I being logical here? And I think it's just growing up in America, growing up in the culture, you kind of get used to it. You just grow up with it and you think it's normal. And you don't, and I think it's good. Otherwise, I'd be living in paranoia, looking over my shoulder like, oh my God, look at like who are all these people who could just be walking around carrying concealed weapons? And I'm sure some do. But it's not something Americans really worry about on a day-to-day basis. I think you would worry about that in some parts of America, to be fair. To be fair. But it's a very interesting topic to me because in Canada, it's not even a concern. It's not even a thought. I'd like to learn more about gun ownership and gun laws in Canada to have a better sort of idea of how it compares and contrasts to gun ownership here in America. You're not walking around afraid of police. Our police, man, these are talk about hot button issues here. I'll say the same thing. I think very similar. Fortunately, Americans' relationship with police got very, very bad over the last 3-4 years. I think George Floyd made that like literally one of the most pressing, biggest issues in America for like a good year or two. That's kind of subsided, and people are slowly starting to regain trust in the police in America. Sadly, for the longest time in America, I think people had a really good relationship with police, as you should. They're there to protect you. They're there to serve you. But with that kind of power also comes corruption, unfortunately, and humans having to be trusted with that power. And I think with body cameras and finally getting to see some of that corruption or like crime committed by police, even though it's a very, very small minority of police in America, very small part of American police that because they do such bad things and because it's covered and documented and made public, as it should be, but it's kind of made out to be a much, much bigger problem than it probably is. And I'm just, to be perfectly candid, I'm just like, some white guy living in like America. My perspective, my experience is going to be vastly different to other people's and other minorities in America and how they interact with police. But in my very narrow view of experience of life in America, as far as this goes, my interactions with police have always been like fine to good, never really all that negative. Certainly, I've never felt in danger. But obviously, that's me. I'm gonna have a lot different experience than other Americans for sure. But I like to think this is blown out of proportion. And most police are, normal people there to serve and protect you. I like to think that Canadians, I mean, this is really nice to hear, like going back to the comments, that Canadians love being able to walk around, not being afraid of guns, not at all thinking about being afraid of police. That's powerful. That's really special. Like that does say a lot about Canadian culture. Okay, these these comments are really getting me going. Let's have a couple more here. What else do Canadians love about Canada? The safety and peacefulness. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't think America covers a lot of Canadian news at all, but it does come across as an American. It comes across as very safe. I don't ever hear about like that much headline-breaking crime, mass shootings, God forbid, that kind of stuff. I don't really hear about that much in Canada. Seems peaceful, seems safe. I'm sure it's lower crime than in America. I think America literally are we the world leader in the amount of prisoners? The amount of people we have in our prisons? We have the most prisons and the most people in prison. That's a whole other discussion, God. So this is a real nice one to hear. Canadians love the safety and peacefulness of Canada. That's nice. And definitely this stuff contrasts a lot with life in America, for sure. But there's a lot of places in America that you can find safety and peace, I think. You might have to go to like a smaller town, you might have to do your research, but those places certainly exist. What else do we have? What Canadians love about Canada? Our embracement of diversity. This is a good one. This is a very good one. I've learned a bit about Canada's diversity, a lot of immigration, a lot of diverse people living together. The country is made up of hundreds of ethnic groups. Strangely, we generally seem to get along quite nicely. It's very, very cool to hear. Sure, we're not perfect, but the open-mindedness that our diversity fosters compels us to see things from a range of perspectives. That's the nice thing about diversity. It opens your mind, opens your perspective, opens your idea, your idea of worldviews to all these other perspectives and with a range of diversity. And that is a really, really cool thing about Canada. It does seem really much more open to that. Frankly, in America, we're just not that diverse of a country. Like plain and simple. We're just not that diverse. There's a fair bit of people of Mexican descent starting to immigrate to America and have been for a while. Some Indian descent for sure. I think like 11 or 12% of America is black if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, it's still like, not the most diverse country, but if you go to a big major city or something, you're going to see a fair bit of diversity. And I think with the current generation of Americans, like growing up on the internet, growing up in a little more diversity than the past, our perspective and our openness to diversity and our acceptance has increased on the whole. There's still racism, there's still people who are going to think certain ways, and it also depends on where you live in America. It's definitely an issue, but it's changing. Slowly changing for the better. I truly believe that. As much flack as America gets for racism, there's a lot of good parts of America and people whose minds are changing finally. Like, yeah, it's good. It's getting better. But I think we're still trying to work our way towards where Canada is at in terms of that. So I agree. That is something Canadians should love about Canada, the embracement of diversity. It's something us Americans are kind of trying to lean towards and follow that idea as well. So this was very, very, very interesting. A lot more philosophical than I thought. I think reading all these comments about what Canadians love about Canada just got my brain working about, okay, Canadians love this about Canada, all these things. Why don't we love that about America? And just got me kind of thinking about that. And that's one of the reasons I love looking at stuff like this, love learning about Canada. And there were a lot of really, really great points here, a lot of things to love about Canada. I was real excited to hear from Canadians what Canadians value about Canada. And this was a lot of topics that are different than the usual, oh, the healthcare is better, the education is cheaper and better, it was a lot more different than that, a lot of different ideas. So that was actually quite enjoyable and eye-opening for me. So anyway, if you enjoyed this as well, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment, perhaps with what you love about Canada. That'd be very interesting to hear about as well. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canada and Canadian culture, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching and see you next time.